Nyaramba was a small town full of stories, a place where families carried pride like a crown and traditions ruled every corner of life. People believed respect for family honor mattered more than anything, and in that environment, Ifeoma arrived as a new bride. She was young, graceful, and filled with hope. Her heart danced with dreams of love, a warm home, and a future where she would be accepted as part of Kato's family. The day she walked into the compound with her bags, her smile was bright, and her eyes shone with excitement. She believed she was stepping into a new life that would bring her joy. But Nyaramba was also a place where whispers traveled faster than the wind. Behind the greetings and polite smiles, not everyone was happy to see her. Some eyes followed her every move, already comparing her to Amira, the woman who had once been part of Kato's life. Ifeoma didn't notice it at first. She only saw the wide compound, the large trees shading the yard, and the home she thought would be her safe place. In her heart, she prayed for peace and acceptance, unaware that the very place she dreamed of belonging to would soon test her spirit in painful ways. From the very first morning in her husband's compound, Ifeoma could feel the weight of coldness in the air. She had expected warmth, laughter, and the gentle welcome of a new family, but instead, she was met with silence and side glances. The women in the compound whispered behind her back, their eyes carrying judgment she could not escape. When she greeted them with a bright smile and bent politely in respect, they only nodded stiffly or turned away as if she were invisible. It stung, but she told herself it was only the beginning, that in time her kindness would soften their hearts. What hurt the most were the constant comparisons. She often overheard her mother-in-law and sisters-in-law mentioning Amira, Kato's ex, as if she were the golden daughter who could never be replaced. Amira would have cooked better, they said when Ifeoma prepared meals. Amira knew how to handle family matters, they muttered when she tried to help with chores. Even the neighbors seemed to know about Amira, and sometimes they looked at Ifeoma with pity, as though she were a shadow standing where another woman once shone. Still, Ifeoma refused to fight back with harsh words. Her spirit was gentle, and she believed that patience and love could heal the cracks forming around her. She smiled through the pain, served food with trembling hands, and tried to greet everyone with warmth, even when her heart felt heavy. At night, she whispered prayers, asking God to give her strength, asking him to help her be accepted. But deep inside she began to sense the truth, that no matter how much love she poured out, this family had already decided she did not belong. They were waiting for her to break, waiting for her to give up. Yet Ifeoma's heart clung tightly to hope. She believed that maybe, just maybe, her husband's love would be enough to cover the wounds his family kept opening. What she did not know was that the hardest test was still to come, one that would shake her faith in everything as it. The afternoon sun in Nyaramba was hot and heavy the day Ifeoma came back from the market with a basket of fresh vegetables. She walked into the compound, humming softly to herself, but her song died on her lips when she reached her room. The door was wide open, and her belongings were scattered in a careless heap outside. Clothes, wrappers, and even her small jewelry box lay in the dust, as though they meant nothing. Her heart skipped, and for a moment she thought there had been some mistake. She rushed inside only to freeze. The room she shared with Kato was no longer hers. Amira was there, sitting comfortably on the bed, adjusting the pillows like she had every right to be there. The family members stood nearby, watching silently, their faces cold and unapologetic. Ifeoma's throat tightened as she struggled to speak, but before she could ask why, her mother-in-law's sharp voice cut through the silence. This house belongs to Kato's true woman. Amira knows him better. She suits him better. You should stay in the guest house. That is where you belong. The words hit her like stones. True woman? Better? Ifeoma felt her knees weaken, but she held herself steady. She looked at Kato standing behind his family, his eyes cast to the ground, lips sealed in silence. That silence was worse than any insult. If he had defended her, even with one word, she might have found courage. But he said nothing, and in that moment, Ifeoma realized she was alone in this fight. Her chest burned, her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of those who wanted to see her broken. With quiet dignity, she gathered what little she could carry, leaving behind the bed, the curtains she had chosen, and the small dream she had sewn into that room. Step by step, she walked toward the forgotten guest house at the edge of the compound. Her heart was heavy, but she carried her silence like armor. even as inside it felt as though her whole world had shattered into pieces. That night, the sting of betrayal pressed harder on Ifeoma's chest than any harsh word could. It wasn't only what Cato's family had done. It was what Cato had failed to do. He had stood there, quiet and small, when his wife needed him most. His silence was louder than a shout, sharper than a knife, and heavier than all the insults she had endured since the day she entered that compound. Ifeoma had always believed that no matter what others said, her husband's love would protect her. But now she saw the truth. He was not her shield. He was not her voice. He was a man too weak to choose her. She sat alone in the guest house, staring at the rough walls, her basket of vegetables still untouched by the door. The words of her mother-in-law replayed in her mind. The true woman. Each time it tore another piece from her heart. She thought about how she had bent in respect, cooked meals, cleaned and prayed for this family. She had given them her gentleness, yet they threw it back at her like trash. And the man she loved, the one she had trusted with her whole heart, allowed it. The betrayal was not just losing a room. It was losing the certainty that she was wanted, that she mattered. Cato's silence told her clearly. In his eyes, her pain was not worth defending. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask how he could let her stand alone against his family. But instead she swallowed her cries because she knew the answer already. He was afraid of them, and he would rather let her break than face their disapproval. In that moment, Ifeoma realized she was not just fighting against in-laws who despised her. She was fighting against her husband's weakness, his inability to stand for love. And nothing in the world could wound a woman more than feeling abandoned in the very home she once thought was hers. That night, the compound was filled with laughter and chatter from the main house. But in the small, forgotten guest house at the edge of the yard, there was only silence and pain. Ifeoma lay on the thin mattress, curled into herself, her face buried in her hands. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked slightly, and the air smelled of dust and dampness, but none of it hurt as much as the emptiness in her heart. She pressed her hand against her chest, as if holding it tightly could stop it from breaking into pieces. Her tears flowed quietly, soaking her pillow, each drop carrying the weight of betrayal, rejection, and shame. She had dreamed of marriage as a safe place, a new chapter filled with joy. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke. How could everything fall apart so quickly? She thought of the day she entered the compound with her bags and her bright smile. She had believed she was stepping into a home where she would be loved, where she would build a future with Cato. But now, lying alone in the darkness, she wondered if her marriage had ended before it even had a chance to begin. Every laugh that floated from the main house felt like a reminder that she was no longer welcome there. They had pushed her aside as if she were a stranger, a mistake, something to be discarded. She asked herself over and over, why me? What did I do to deserve this? But no answer came, only more tears and a deep heaviness pressing down on her spirit. Still, in the middle of her sorrow, Ifeoma clung to a tiny thread of strength. Though her body shook with sobs, her heart whispered a quiet prayer for courage. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she could not let this night define her forever. Yet at that moment, in the silence of the guest house, she felt nothing but brokenness, as if the love she once trusted had slipped through her fingers like sand. The night had drained every bit of strength from Ifeoma, but as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks of the guest house, something inside her shifted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body weak from exhaustion, yet her spirit refused to die. She sat up slowly, looking around the dusty room that smelled of abandonment. The walls were bare, the floor rough, the corners filled with cobwebs. It was not the kind of place anyone would call a home, but in that brokenness, Ifeoma felt a sudden spark of determination. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and whispered to herself, if they think they can break me, they are wrong. I will not live as their victim. Her voice was soft, but it carried the strength of a promise. For too long, she had tried to win their approval with patience and kindness. Now she understood that her dignity did not depend on their acceptance. She had the power to rise, even if she had to do it alone. Her eyes traveled across the small space, and instead of seeing a prison, she began to see possibility. The cracked walls could be washed, the dusty floor could be scrubbed, the tiny window could let in light if she cleaned it. The little house at the edge of the compound, which everyone ignored, could become something new, something hers. In that moment, the guest house became more than just a shelter. It became a canvas for her strength, a place where she would rebuild not just a home, but herself. Her heart was still aching, her marriage still uncertain, but she refused to let pain define her story. She had lost her room, her comfort, even her husband's support, but she had not lost her spirit. With trembling hands but a burning resolve, Ifeoma made a silent vow. This small house would not be her shame, it would become her palace. The next morning, Ifeoma tied a scarf around her head and rolled up her sleeves. She refused to sit in pity. The guest house, though forgotten by everyone else, would no longer be a place of shame. With her own hands she began to work. She fetched buckets of water from the well and scrubbed the dusty floor until her arms ached. She wiped down the walls, washing away years of neglect, and opened the small window so that sunlight could stream in. Every stroke of her hand felt like she was wiping not just dirt, but also the bitterness clinging to her heart. Outside, she cleared the weeds that had grown wild around the little house. She dug small holes in the soil and planted flowers she had picked from the bush. Their green leaves and bright colors gave her hope, as if beauty could bloom again even in a place of rejection. Neighbors who passed by stopped to watch her, surprised at her energy. Some whispered in pity, others in admiration, but Ifeoma kept her head high, determined not to stop. To add more life to her space, she began selling handmade beadwork in woven baskets at the market. She had always been skilled with her hands, and now she used that gift to earn a little money. Every coin she saved went back into the guest house, buying curtains, clay pots, or small decorations to brighten the rooms. Slowly the place began to change. What was once dark and lifeless started to glow with warmth and care. Each evening when she sat on the porch, surrounded by her flowers and the sweet breeze of Nyaramba, she felt a quiet pride. The same house that was meant to belittle her was now becoming a symbol of her resilience. Step by step, touch by touch, Ifeoma was turning pain into power. And though her heart was still tender from betrayal, her spirit was shining brighter than ever. Day by day, the small guest house began to change until it no longer looked like the forgotten corner of the compound. Ifeoma poured her heart into every detail, and slowly the place transformed. She hung bright curtains that swayed gently in the breeze, making the room feel alive. On the porch she lined clay pots filled with flowers, their colors bursting with life. Inside she arranged mats neatly on the floor, spread out woven baskets, and decorated the walls with her handmade crafts. The air carried the soft fragrance of fresh herbs she had planted nearby, and sunlight filled the once dark room with a golden glow. What had been a place of dust and rejection now felt like a home touched by love. Ifeoma's touch gave the little house an elegance that no one expected. It wasn't just beautiful. It carried her spirit, her resilience, and her quiet dignity. When she sat outside in the evenings, the setting sun painting the sky, she no longer felt invisible. She felt like a woman who had turned ashes into beauty. It didn't take long for whispers to spread through Nyaramba. Visitors passing by slowed their steps to take a look. Neighbors murmured in surprise, "Have you seen Ifeoma's place? It looks royal." Others added, "That house shines brighter than the main compound." People who once pitied her now admired her. The same guest house her in-laws had pushed her into had become the talk of the town. Even those within the compound could not ignore it. Children ran to play near her flowers, women stopped to ask about her crafts, and men nodded with respect as they passed. Ifeoma had created more than just a home. She had built a palace with her own hands, a palace that carried her scars but also her triumph. What was meant to break her had instead crowned her with strength, and the world was beginning to notice. Cato's family had thought they had silenced Ifeoma the day they pushed her into the guest house. They believed she would stay small, hidden, and humiliated. But instead each day she seemed to rise higher, her spirit shining brighter than before. From the windows of the main house, they could see the flowers blooming outside her door, the colorful curtains dancing in the breeze, and the steady stream of neighbors who came to admire her handiwork. What was meant to shame her had become her crown. The people of Nyaramba began to talk openly. At the market, women said, "Have you seen how Ifeoma has turned that little house into a palace? That girl has strength." Men admired her resilience. Children ran happily to play near her garden, and elders blessed her name. Every praise from outside made the family inside the compound shrink with discomfort. They could not understand how the woman they rejected was now receiving respect that even they could not command. Amira, who once walked through the main house with confidence, began to feel the weight of emptiness pressing on her. Though she sat in the big room, surrounded by space and attention, she could not escape the whispers that compared her to Iphioma. The more Iphioma's palace shone, the more Amira's presence felt dull. Even when she tried to boast or flaunt, people only shook their heads saying, "She may have the main house, but Iphioma has the heart of a queen." Cato's family watched all of this in silence, their shock growing each day. They had hoped to break her spirit, but instead, she had shown a strength they could not match. For the first time they realized that their cruelty had not destroyed her, it had only given her wings. And with each passing day, Iphioma's light only grew brighter, making their own hearts restless with shame. One quiet evening when the sun was sinking low and painting the sky in shades of gold, Cato found himself wandering toward the guest house. He had watched from a distance as neighbors spoke highly of Iphioma, as children played by her flowers, and as even his own mother's face tightened with discomfort whenever someone mentioned her name. Curiosity tugged at him, and for the first time, he stepped inside the little house where his wife now lived. The moment he entered, he froze. The place was unrecognizable. Warm light filled the room, curtains swayed gently at the window, and the air carried the soft scent of herbs and flowers. Clay pots and woven baskets decorated the corners, each one carefully placed, giving the space a harmony that felt both simple and royal. It was not just a house, it was a home alive with love, resilience, and quiet strength. Cato's eyes rested on Iphioma, who sat on a mat near the doorway, stringing beads with calm focus. She did not rush to greet him, nor did she look at him with the same eager eyes she once had. There was no desperation in her face, only dignity. For the first time, he saw her not as the quiet bride his family had pushed aside, but as a woman who had carved her own place in the world. In her silence, in her grace, she looked like a queen who had built her own throne. A wave of guilt washed over him. He remembered her tears, her pain, the night she had walked away from their shared room without a word. He had done nothing to stop it, nothing to defend her. Yet here she was, standing taller than anyone in the compound, her spirit brighter than ever. That night, Cato's heart stirred in a way it never had before. He realized that while his family had tried to strip her of dignity, Iphioma had created a glory none of them could destroy. And in that moment Cato saw her clearly. His wife, his queen, the woman he had been too blind to honor. It did not take long before the shame crept back into Cato's family like a shadow they could not escape. At first they had walked proudly, convinced they had done the right thing by giving Amira the main house. But now, when they went to the market or visited neighbors, they could feel the sting of gossip following them everywhere. The people of Nyaramba were not silent anymore. They laughed openly and said, "How can you throw out Iphioma from her room and give it to another woman? Yet she has built something better than your own house?" The words spread quickly, cutting into the family's pride like sharp knives. Cato's mother, who once boasted of Amira, now walked with her head lowered. His sisters, who had mocked Iphioma's cooking and manners, no longer found the courage to speak her name in arrogance. Everywhere they turned, people reminded them of the guest house that now shone brighter than their own compound. Respect, which they thought they owned, was slipping through their fingers and flowing toward the woman they had tried to destroy. Inside the compound, the air grew tense. Amira sat in the main house, but her presence no longer brought joy or satisfaction. Instead, it reminded the family of the mistake they had made. Neighbors visited Iphioma more than they visited them, and their own courtyard felt emptier by the day. Even the children preferred to play among Iphioma's flowers, where laughter and warmth lived. At night, the family whispered in regret, each blaming the other for the cruel decision that had turned against them. "We thought we would shame her," one muttered. "But she has shamed us instead," another replied. Their words carried bitterness, but deep down they knew the truth. In trying to break Iphioma, they had only revealed her strength. And now, the respect they had denied her had returned to her tenfold, leaving them to sit in the silence of their own disgrace. Amira had once walked through the main house with her head high, believing she had won. She had the big room, the attention of Cato's family, and the comfort of being called the better woman. For a while she tasted the sweetness of victory, but it did not last. Slowly, her triumph began to feel bitter as she watched what Iphioma was building. The guest house that was meant to humiliate her rival had become a place of beauty, a palace that drew admiration from the whole town. At first, Amira pretended not to notice. She told herself. It's only a small house, nothing compared to mine. But the whispers of neighbors grew louder. Have you seen Ifeoma's place? It shines like royalty, they said, their voices carrying envy and respect. Amira heard it everywhere, in the market, at the well, even when children played outside. Each word pierced her pride, and she began to feel restless in the very room she thought was her crown. No matter how much space she had in the main house, it felt cold and empty. The walls were wide, but they carried no warmth. She decorated, she tried to host visitors, but nothing could match the glow that came from the guest house. When she looked at Ifeoma sitting gracefully on her porch, surrounded by flowers and friends, Amira's chest tightened with jealousy. It was not just the beauty of the house that troubled her. It was the strength Ifeoma carried. That quiet dignity, that resilience, was something Amira could never imitate. She began to see the truth that others had already noticed. The main house might have been hers, but the heart of the compound belonged to Ifeoma. Each day, Amira's envy grew heavier. She had thought winning Cato's family's approval would make her powerful, but instead, it left her empty. In the shadow of Ifeoma's palace, she realized that beauty built from pain and strength will always outshine comfort handed down by cruelty. It wasn't long before the little guest house became more than just Ifeoma's shelter. It became a place of inspiration. Women from Nyaramba and even nearby villages began to visit her, drawn by the beauty and peace surrounding her home. They came first out of curiosity, wanting to see with their own eyes how a woman cast aside could build something so lovely. But soon, their curiosity turned into admiration. They sat with her on the porch, touched the flowers she had planted, and marveled at the warmth of the small house that felt richer than many large homes. Some came quietly with tears in their eyes, confessing the struggles in their own marriages and families. How did you do it, Ifeoma? They asked. How did you turn pain into strength? Ifeoma listened with a soft smile, her eyes kind but steady. She did not speak like a woman who wanted pity. Instead, she spoke like someone who had discovered a hidden power within herself. I stopped waiting for others to give me value, she told them. I realized dignity does not come from their approval. It comes from the courage inside you. Her words touched hearts because they came from a place of truth. The women left her home not just admiring her flowers or her beautiful decorations, but carrying hope in their own spirits. They began to spread her story, telling others how Ifeoma had risen from rejection to build a palace of her own. Soon, her name was spoken with respect in every corner of Nyaramba. People said, she is proof that no one can destroy a woman who believes in herself. What had started as shame had now become a movement of inspiration. Ifeoma was no longer just Cato's wife. She had become a symbol of resilience for women everywhere. The guest house stood as a reminder that even when life tries to push you down, you can rise higher than anyone expects. And in that rising, you can light the path for others.
Zwaar zeige door die lulsing auf was mit mij voor dich. They auch nog dat knife maken the triangle. Yeah, no.
Ifeoma's story spread far beyond the compound walls. What began as a dusty little guest house soon became a symbol of courage for the whole town. People no longer called it the small house at the edge. They called it a palace. Women pointed to it when they spoke about dignity. Children played near its flowers as if it were a safe haven, and elders nodded with pride whenever her name was mentioned. She had not only won back her respect, she had created something greater. A legacy. The same family that once tried to break her now watched in silence, as the community lifted her higher than they had ever imagined. Amira's presence in the main house faded into the background, while Ifeoma's light continued to grow brighter. Every chair she polished, every flower she planted, every coin she saved told a story. Rejection can be turned into glory. She had proved that no one could decide her worth except herself, and as she sat on the porch of her palace, the evening sun painting the sky gold, she smiled softly. Her journey had been full of pain, but it had led her here, to strength, to honor, and to a throne she built with her own hands. Ifeoma was no longer just a bride in Nyaramba. She was a queen in her own right, and her palace would forever remind others that brokenness can be transformed into beauty.